Thank you very much, Tony. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this IIRSM webinar. Hope you enjoy the talk regarding managing contractors on construction sites. So what I'm going to do is just switch off my camera. Apologies for that, but internet's just slightly slow here, and if the camera's on and I'm talking and moving through the slides, I don't want that to disturb. So I'll switch my camera off and I'll turn it back on at the end. So thank you for that. Okay, so Tony's already done a very nice introduction. Thank you for that, Tony. So I was the lead construction officer for a local authority, looking after around £200 million worth of construction projects, predominantly in CDM. I was voted the APS CDM Coordinator of the Year in 2015, which was the very last year the CDM Coordinator role was in before it was took over by the Principal Designer in April of that year. As Tony mentioned, I lecture at the University of Hull on the second year of the NEBOSH diploma on what was Unit C, now NDC 2. I sit on the APS members of the Board of Directors. I was luckily enough and privileged to be voted President-elect, which I take up that role as President on the 1st of October. I do NEBOSH examinations, so I mark examination strips, and I am the Managing Director of Abbey Construction Consultants Limited. Okay, CDM health and safety law when using contractors. So I'm hoping this presentation will inform you on what you must do to comply with health and safety requirements when you are using contractors. However, it doesn't apply to temporary or agency workers, as there is more specific information about them using that link. I am happy to share the slides to send them to Julie and to Tony, so if you wanted a copy, absolutely welcome for that. So contractors, who and what are they? Well, contractors are professionals who will provide you with their skills and services and to other companies and organisations for a set period of time. They can be contracted for a set number of hours, for a certain time frame, or for a full duration of a project. Contractors can be self-employed, someone who works independently as a sole trader, or they can run their own limited company, as I do with Abbey Construction. Independent contractors work for themselves and source their own clients. However, an umbrella company or agency can also employ contractors. Those who work for a company may not have to find their own clients, as they can work with clients sourced by that company. The company will then also pay the contractor and their applicable taxes. Whether employed or independent, contractors can work on one or multiple contracts at any given time. And with transferable skills, contractors can often work with a variety of businesses, so different sectors. What does the HSE say about contractors? Well, there's been a significant reduction in the number and rate of injuries over the last 20 years or more. Nevertheless, construction still remains a high-risk industry. Although it accounts for only 6% of employees in the UK, it does account for approximately 30% of fatal injuries to employees. Construction accounts for the second greatest number of fatal injuries of any of the industry sectors, second only to agriculture. And over 10% of reported major specified injuries come from the construction industry. In 2018-19, we had 30 people killed working on construction sites. My latest figures, what I've seen today, has raised that figure to 36 fatalities. So what's your responsibilities as a client, somebody who's procuring the services of that contractor? So if you're their advisor, or you're the health and safety manager working for the client, then both you and the client and the contractor that you've chosen to use have responsibilities under health and safety law. Everyone needs to take part with making sure the right precautions are identified and introduced, which will reduce the risks of workplace dangers to both employees and to the general public. Also, site visitors, other contractors. You need to make sure, or you need to make sure, everyone understands the part that they need to play to ensure health and safety is identified, captured, and managed. The client organisation would need to make someone competent to be responsible for informing the contractor of the site rules and procedures, what working hours are permitted and what working hours are not permitted. Can they work after 5 p.m. on a night? Can they work weekends, etc.? So that would all need to be identified as part of the site rules. Any areas that they're not permitted to enter, so no-go areas. What the permit to work system is. In some instances, some of my clients insist contractors have to use the client's permit to work system because it's more robust, and some clients say the contractor has to implement and use their own permit to work system. The main point I'm making is this information has to be made clear prior to any works commencing. That has to then be passed to the contractor or the principal contractor, then to the contractor, then to any subcontractors, etc. That information flow, coordination and communication has to be paramount. You'll also need to satisfy yourself that the contractor being chosen to do the job safely and without risk to health is competent. So there's a huge competence check there. So you have to make inquiries about that competence of that contractor. Have they got the right combinations of skills, experience and knowledge? And the new addition to the SKE is the B at the end, which is behaviour. We introduced the HSE have announced yesterday that they are going to have a 10-year drive on behavioural measures within health and safety. So that SKE is now changed to SKEB, SKEB, skills, knowledge, experience and behavioural. Also, you need to look at the degree of competence. So what competence has that contractor or contractor organisation currently got? And is that at the right level for the work that you want them to do? So for instance, you wouldn't employ a bricklayer to do any electrical or gas work, vice versa. And if you are employing them to be a bricklayer, have they got the right set of knowledge, skills to be able to do that and evidence that information. Similarly, the level of inquiries you make should be determined by the level of risks and the complexity of the job. So the more higher risk, the more in-depth inquiries you would make regarding the competence of that contractor. Also, the need for public liability insurance. I'm sure there's people listening in on this webinar this evening that's had similar issues to my organisation in procuring public liability insurance. The ramifications of Grenfell, I think to some point, slight misunderstanding by insurance organisations, and insurances are trebled, quadrupled in some instances. So you need to make sure the person or the contractor organisation you're bringing on board has got that public liability insurance for the right amount that your organisation requires. Also checking any tasks that's not covered by the insurance and the required levels of cover. So we, an instance, Abbey Construction is insured to do health and safety advice, health and safety management systems, to provide client advisor service and to provide the principal designer service. So all of those services that we provide are clearly stated on our insurance documents, and that's what you would need to look for. Don't just look to see that they've got public liability insurance, but focus into it and make sure that it's at the level and covers the work that you require. You need to identify all aspects of the work that you want the contractor to do. That includes the hidden, the high level risk, and the obscure elements should all be identified up front. And then consider the health and safety implications of that work. Where will they be working? What's surrounding that environment? What will there be interjection with that for the forklift trucks, transport? other contractors working on the same site but in different sections. And remember, the level of risk will depend on the nature and complexity of the work. You should provide potential contractors with all of the above information and that I've just discussed, and make sure that they know and understand the performance you expect of them. So part of your site rules, you might say not permitted in this area, no bad language is permitted, no food to be eaten in these areas. So you would provide them with all of that information. You would also provide them with a job specification and the client scope of the project. This is what the client wants, this is what he wants it to look like, this is when he wants it, etc., etc. Also, site accidents are to be reported. You need to tell the contractor who they're to be reported to and when are they to be reported and what mechanism are you using for reporting them. So if there's an accident occurs from a contractor on your client's site, then you would need information of who the contractor makes contact with in the client organisation. Is that within 24 hours of the accident happening, and does he want that as a printed copy of the RIDO regulation, or an email sending, or a text message, or a phone call? So all that has to be set out in advance for it to work smoothly once the work commences on site. You also need to consider any contractors or subcontractors who may not fully understand English language. So there may be a requirement for an interpreter. It might be used for pictograms rather than text information. Site rules may be in picture formats. And note if the work is construction or building work, as a client, you have duties in Construction Design and Management Regulations 2015 or L153 series will provide you with more definitive information regarding that. One of the sites I'm currently working on just inside the centre of London, everybody working on that site, English is not their first language. And out of 60 people on site, only 2 people can speak English, and we use those as the interpreters. We tend to give out pictorial information and then get the interpreters to explain the meanings behind them, documents signed, and then we go and watch what they do on site to make sure that they are working to the requirements is set out within them, pictograms, etc. So it can work as long as it's communicated effectively. So what's some of the questions you would need to ask potential contractors? For instance, what arrangements will you have for managing the work? Who will be responsible for that work, and how will it be supervised? What checks do you make on equipment and materials? Will then contractors be using any subcontractors? And if so, how will they be checking that their subcontractors are competent? What's the level of competence for subcontractors? And that will depend on the risk and complexity of the work, as we've already said. What's their recent health and safety performance? So, for example, how many accidents, incidents, or cases of ill health have they had in a certain period of time, be it 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, etc. And has the HSE taken any action against them? And remember, with the HSE, you can use the HSE's Prosecution register to see if they've received any improvement, prohibition, or legal action against them. But what you can't see from the HSE is if any fee for interventions have been issued. So that would be another question I would ask. Have you received any fees for interventions? And see if they come back with honest replies. Most do. Have they got a written health and safety policy if there's more than 5, if there's 5 or more people working for that contractor? And they should have. And they provide you with the statement of intent. Can they give you an example of risk assessments? Now, put on there done for similar jobs. So I was working with a client a couple of months ago, and it was a multi-storey high-rise building. They wanted to remove the existing fire suspension system or the sprinkler system and upgrade it and replace it. So we sent them as client organisation pre-construction information, and we received a construction phase plan back in return. We asked for an example risk assessment, and the example risk assessment we were sent was the dismantling of a coal bunker. Absolutely nothing at all to do with the work in hand. So that was rejected, and we went off with another request. We did 3 times until we finally got one what we could review against the requirements of the project we wanted them to undertake and follow. So it's definitely worth doing that. You have to have that kind of background, that in-depth look at what their practices and procedures are. What qualifications, skills and experience do they have in this type of work? And remember, there's 2 types here. The first one would be an organisation level, where you would look for CHAS or safe contractor accreditation, SSIP, etc., safety schemes and procurement. But there's also the individuals who will be doing that work on site. So what qualifications, skills, experience, knowledge, behaviour have they got on that site? So, for instance, CSCS cards will be one piece, but not ultimately all a competent method of showing their competence. What health and safety information and training does the contractor provide? And if required, do they also have employees' liability compulsory insurance? If they do, we want to see them. A case study here. So all these case studies are true, and I've only concentrated on the criminal element here. I've not considered the civil element of the prosecution. This was a tree surgeon who was felling a branch when it fell onto a neighbouring garden, damaging a fence panel. However, an hour earlier, the neighbour had been in the garden playing with a 20-month-old child. The tree surgeon had neither the qualifications to use a chainsaw nor the skill to carry out the job safely. If the property developer allowed the tree surgeon had checked that the tree surgeon was competent when he hired him and done all the competency checks, then the incident would probably have been avoided. Don't just assume somebody is competent. Do those background checks to make sure. So we talked about competence. What actually is competence? Well, it's a makeup of skills. Have they got the requisite skills? Have they got the knowledge? Have they got the ability and attitude within that field of work you're asking them to do the work for? Have they had the training? Are they suitably trained? And have they got that background experience? And when you put those 5 bubbles together, you come up with that centre bubble, which then you'll be able to demonstrate that the procuring contractor is competent to do the work you want him to do. Now, when I lecture on this at the University of Hull, I break competence down into 3 stages, stage 1, 2 and 3. So stage 1 is where they would apply to come onto an approved contractor framework or contractors list. To do that, the company would then check their suitability, so they'll be checking things like insurance, any past projects they've done, any accreditations, so SSIP, safe contractor CHAS, things like that. So that would then get them, if successful, onto the client's approved framework list. If approved, then they would go onto that register. Once that was done, so you've done the organisation competence, you would then move on to stage 2. That's an evaluation done once you've then identified a specific project and you wanted to issue that to a specific contractor. You would then provide them with some form of pre-construction information. I say some form because depending on the project would vary the amount and level of information that you would provide as pre-construction information. And you would share that with all them tendering. This stage would then be repeated for each new project you wanted to issue out. So that'd be your stage 2. And then stage 3 is to review the HSE's prosecution register, which is very quick, doesn't take long. I'll put the website on the slides for you. You click that, it will take you straight into the HSE's prosecution register. You can click onto this where you can sort by hearing date, the breach, the principal contractor or the contractor, and it will give you results of whether they've suffered previous prosecution. And this one was against Merlin Mouldings, which was the young lady who had to have a leg amputated from a knee down on the ride. If you remember that one, 5 million prosecution plus another 2.5 million. But that's the information it gives you. Again, if you're procuring a contractor for yourself or on behalf of an organisation, please remember that this information takes literally seconds to review. So if you didn't do it, it would be for you to explain in a court of law, should there have been an accident, why you didn't do this to ensure the procuring contractor was indeed competent. I've already mentioned safety schemes in procurement, SSIP, which is your CHAS, Safe Mark, construction line. The same for electrical. The gas engineers would all have their own professional bodies where you would be able to check that competence. CSCS cards would verify and identify that the person you're procuring has received the necessary training, qualification and experience for that type of specific work you're wanting them to carry out on a site. I've also popped on there PAS 91 plus A1 to 2017 because this document, it sets out a standardised pre-qualification questionnaire which has been developed to reduce the need for for suppliers to complete a variety of different pre-qualifications. So for me, I would have to do one set of pre-qualification questionnaire for one client, and then a different one for another client, and a different one for another client. Whereas if we'd have all abided to PAS 91, I could have just done the one. The same information would have gone to each client, so it saves time and multiple completion of pre-qualification questionnaires. It was developed by the BSI, British Standards Industry, and the question set has been commissioned by government and therefore is recommended common minimum standard for construction procurement. And it's free to download. And it's free. You could write your own questionnaire from that, which means you're meeting both BSI and government standards. Another case law is the fall from height of the painter. He was painting, the ladder moved, the painter then fell more than 4 metres, resulted in a serious injury to his hip, leg, and suffered 8 fractures to his knee. The HSC said a most applicable equipment to use would have been a tower or podium steps, which would have prevented the fall off the ladder, and therefore West Lothian Council was deemed to have failed to properly plan and supervise that work, which resulted in a £10,000 fine. On top of that would have been the costs, and on top of that would have been a civil claim. Communication, so you or the client and the contractor need to communicate with each other throughout the process. This can be site meetings, daily briefings, emails, phone conversations, team meetings, etc., etc. Make sure that the contractor and their employees have got information where relevant for any health and safety risks that they may face whilst undertaking that work. And that could be asbestos registers, an existing site risk portfolio, any traffic routes, pedestrian routes, any fragile surfaces, all that type of information. Make sure there's measures in place to deal with those risks and make sure they're aware of them, and what your current emergency procedures are so that they know what to follow, where to go, who to report to. The information you provide should be in a form which is easy to understand. Similarly, you must provide clear instruction, information and adequate training for your own employees or your own contractors who are principal contractor. Let's not forget environmental considerations, which is controlling pollution from air and noise pollution, which would include vibration. Dust prevention strategy, so as part of your rules, are you saying they have to have a dust capture system or a water suspension system? Are you saying that they have to have limited stockpiles so they can't block the client's site up with multiple stockpiles? Waste from site, have they got waste transfer notes? Is that waste going off to a licensed landfill if it's applicable? How are they managing contaminated material waste? How are they neutralising waste or reusing that material? How are they ensuring the odours are escaping during transportation? Any fuels and chemicals, what's on site? Are they in bunds with a minimum of 10% of the largest amount of chemicals stored? Have they got a contingency plan to handle any spills? Or have they got spill kits, train people, disposal arrangements for that spill kit. Are they maintaining roads in a acceptable manner? So are they sweeping them roads? Are they using wheel washers? Are they covering loads before they leave site on vehicles? Are they using appropriate machinery for the site and for the building conditions? And who's carrying out regular inspections to make sure all of the above is being addressed? So you would, as part of your rules, include this information. This is what we expect whilst you're doing this work for us. And then you would either do a client specific or a joint with a contractor dual inspection to make sure what you wanted was indeed being provided on site. If it's a notifiable project under CDM 2015, then you need to make a notification to the HSE using the form F20. So a project would be notifiable if it lasts longer than 30 working days and has more than 20 workers working simultaneously at any point within that project or within them 30 days, or if it exceeds 500 person days. That's where a project would be notifiable. The client must give notice in writing to the executive as soon as it's practicable before the construction phase begins. So I've got some examples there of a very simple Excel spreadsheet that I use. So scenario one, a contractor is being awarded a contract to rewire part of the building. There's no other trades are required to do any work. The project will require only 2 people, and it's anticipated that the work will take 6 weeks working Monday to Friday. State the requirements for the project. You can see in red I've highlighted note construction phase plan, PCI's pre-construction information, a bit of an acronym breakdown there. So we know it's 5 working days because we've said it's Monday to Friday, and we know it's for 6 weeks because we've got here it's for 6 weeks. So 5 times 6 is 30, so that's your 30 working days. But we've got 2 people working for 5 days times 6 weeks, so 2 times 5 is 10, times 6 is 60 person days. So we've not exceeded the 500 person days, and we've not exceeded the first point, which is 30 working days with more than 20 people working simultaneously. So after this calculation here, we can quite safely say that that project is not notifiable, doesn't fall under the notification requirements. However, a construction phase plan is still required. If it's minor works, then a risk assessment and method statement would suffice as a construction phase plan. Pre-construction information is still required from the client to the contractor, but a principal designer or principal contractor is not required because there's only one contractor, and therefore a health and safety file would not be required. Example 2, you've obtained capital approval to extend your current building. The project is expected to require 10 people from various contractors working for 6 weeks, Monday to Friday. State the requirements for the project. So again, we've said it's 5 working days because we've said Monday to Friday. We've said for 6 weeks, 5 times 6 is 30. This time we've said 10 people working for 5 days times 6 weeks. 10 times 5 times 6 is 300 person days. Therefore, it's still not notifiable because we've not exceeded the 500 person days, and we've still only got 10 people on site. We've not exceeded 20. However, construction phase plan is still required, as is a pre-construction information document. However, this time, a principal designer and principal contractor must be appointed in writing because we've got more than one contractor. We've got various contractors. And therefore, where we have more than one contractor, we will require a health and safety file. And the final project, example is you've obtained capital approval to install a production line. The project is expected to require 15 people from 5 contractors working for 20 weeks, Monday to Friday. So it's the same calculation. 5 days per week times 20 weeks is 100 working days. We've said it's got 15 people, so 15 times Monday to Friday, the 5 working days, times the 20 weeks is 1,500 person days. So on this occasion, notification is required because we've exceeded the 500 person days, we've got 15. So we would make that notification to the HSE. Construction phase plan and pre-construction information would be required. We have more than one contractor, so we need to appoint principal designer, principal contractor. and as with more than one contractor, health and safety file will be required. Another case study for you, this one was a farm worker. A farm worker received internal injuries and severe burns from electric shock when he lifted an irrigation pipe and it contacted 33,000 volts overhead power lines. The employer had not discussed the presence of the overhead lines and identified a safe way of moving the irrigation pipes. The employer should have made the contractor aware of the risks he faced and agreed a safe method of work before the job was started. Don't just assume contractors will be aware of all the risks on your site, even if they seem obvious to you. This one was 54 houses. Quite unbelievable, this one, but it was a construction site that was building 54 houses out of timber frame. So you can imagine how much timber was on that site to build 54 houses. And the contractor, principal contractor, hadn't took very good measures to prevent fire starting on that site or spreading. The HSC was just driving by when they spotted this one. There was no accident. It was just a drive-by inspection by the HSC. They went on site, asked to see the fire prevention policy, the fire risk assessment, fire strategy, etc. There was virtually nothing in place. The HSC classed it as a lack of site management and lack of an emergency planning. There was a risk of workers being hit by construction vehicles because there was no traffic management plan in place, no safe places to cross a road or segregation from pedestrians and vehicles. And that contractor was fined £100,000 plus 4,600 in costs. Please bear in mind what I said. There was no accident on that site. The HSC just happened to spot it as they was driving by. So why do we do all this? Well, statistics show that in 2018-19 we had 30 fatalities in construction, 79,000 workplace injuries, 42,000 musculoskeletal disorders, and 16,000 people suffering from stress, depression or anxiety, with the total ill health in 2018-19 79,000. HSC enforcement in that same period was 1,609 prohibition notices issued, 1,316 improvement notices issued, and from them there was 158 prosecutions that went to the courts, which was successfully prosecuted. If you add all the fines up from them 158 prosecutions, it comes to £15.7 million. And if you divide that 15.7 million between the 158 prosecutions, it gives an average prosecution ratio of £107,000 per conviction. And I put the website there from the HSC should you wish to look at them figures more deeper. So we must cooperate and coordinate with the contractor. You and the client, or the client and the contractor must work together to coordinate both your activities and to make sure that the work can be done safely without risk to health from the contractor or principal contractor. One way of doing this is to hold regular meetings throughout the works. The level of cooperation and coordination needed would obviously depend on what work is in hand, what work needs to be doing, the number of contractors or subcontractors that's involved, and what's the level of risks involved. Decide what you need to do to manage the contractor's work. The measures that you put in place should be consistent with the level of risk. So, as I've said, the greater the risk, the more you would need to do. Consider the following. Who will be responsible for the work and what do you expect them to do? Who will supervise the work and how will they supervise it? How will the work be done and what precautions will be taken? What equipment should or should not be worked on or used? What PPE equipment is to be used and who will provide it? What are the working procedures, including permit to works? And what's the arrangements for stopping the work if there are serious health and safety concerns? So if the client or his representative went on site and wanted to halt work activities because there was a risk of serious or imminent danger, what's the procedure for doing that? So that would also need to be stated. Once the work started, make sure that you keep a check on how the work is going against what you have agreed. You can do this by carrying out regular inspections. Ask yourself, are the control measures working that we've put in place? If they're not, then they need to be upgraded. If they are, then you need to make sure they're maintained. Investigate if things go wrong, such as near misses, accidents, ill health. Something's gone wrong, something's not been identified, a risk is being missed. So there's a need to do more work to address them shortcomings. Ask yourself, what went wrong and what can we do to prevent this from happening again? After the job is finished, there's always benefits in reviewing and learning from lessons to see if performance can be improved in future. Contractors must not carry out any construction work unless they are satisfied that the client is aware of their duties. That's their first requirement under CDM. They must satisfy themselves that any contractors or designers what they're engaging are competent and adequately resourced. They must cooperate with the principal contractor if one is appointed. They must provide information to the principal contractor such as method statements, risk assessments, cost assessments, safe working methods. They must comply with any reasonable direction from the principal contractor and with any relevant rules what is stated in their construction phase plan. They must plan, manage, monitor their work while taking into account the risks to those who may be affected by their activities by applying the principles of prevention. Principles of prevention can be found in the CDM regulations 2015 or in the management regulations. They must report to the principal contractor any accidents and dangerous occurrences. They must provide information for the health and safety files that can be collated and used for the use and maintenance of the building. They must provide information, instruction, training and supervision to their employees and demonstrate that they've done that. They must prevent any unauthorised entry into that works area or that site and providing suitable welfare facilities for anyone working under their control. The contractor, poor practice of working at height and scaffolding risks on a hotel refurbishment site. Poor scaffolding found during the refurbishment of an hotel where unsurprisingly a prohibition notice was served by the HSE. A roof of indeterminate strength was being used as a platform on which to foot the scaffold. At ground level, scaffolding standards were footed on loose timber boards, which were bridging an excavation. Some footing could not be examined due to the build-up of debris and scrap timber was being used to foot scaffolding rather than proper sole plates. Excuse me for breaking off this presentation for one moment before I show you the pictures. I've just had the news that Her Majesty the Queen has sadly passed. That's why I was hesitating with that slide. So I'll finish the presentation, but deepest sympathy to the Wells family. So here's the picture of that prosecution. You can see where the sole plates are on these scaffolding boards, what's being cut. They're not on the right angle. What's more applicable to me is once you see that, there was actually contractors working on that scaffolding. Unbelievable. And when we talk about the mess at the bottom of the scaffold, that's what we saw. Ladders there was scaffolding boards bridged across here with these standards on. It was a disaster. Welfare, this one was a security guard. You can read the slide. I'll give you the background. The security guard was employed to protect the site during the hours it was closed, so 6 on the night till 6 in the morning. The generator failed in his little cabin, what he used so every hour he had to come out the cabin, walk around the site, back into the cabin. And it was a cold wintry night. His generator had failed, couldn't get any heat, it was really cold. So he tried to use his initiative. He went outside and got a wheelbarrow, put some barbecue coals in it, lit it to try and generate some heat. It was still cold, so he pulled the doors to, fell asleep, and unfortunately died of CO poisoning. Prosecution happened because there was a failure to provide a man management system to protect the welfare and safety of workers. Very small fine there of 16,000 with 11 costs. I believe I'm 10-2, so I've 10 minutes left for questions. If anyone's got any questions, that's the end of my presentation. I hope you all enjoyed and gained some knowledge and information from that presentation. I'll pop my camera back on and I'm happy to field any questions if there's any come in. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ray, for a great presentation. We don't have any questions yet. I think that because your presentations are so comprehensive, I don't think it leaves room for questions. So we'll just give it a couple of minutes. Really sad news about the Queen. I just saw that before you mentioned it.
It really is a shame. God bless her. So what we can do, Julie, if we don't get any questions in the next minute or two, but they're coming after that, please feel free to field them to me via email and I'll send them back to you.
That's fantastic. You mentioned you were happy to share your presentation. Is it the same one that you did before? Because I've still got a copy of that.
It is, Julie, yes. So please feel free to share that.
Yeah, so if anybody would like a copy of Ray's presentation, if you just email branches@IIRSM.org and I'll arrange for a copy of that presentation to be sent to you. So I'd like to thank you, Ray, for another excellent presentation. I always enjoy your presentations and learn a lot. And I'd like to thank everybody for attending this evening. As usual, the presentation will be recorded and uploaded onto the IIRSM YouTube channel. And your CPD certificates will come out roughly this time tomorrow. So I'd like to thank everybody for attending and wish everybody a good evening or a good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.